Hey everybody, this is Perch. And as we all try and make sense of sales, this is a question that talks about sales from the account Comics and Finance, which I think has a YouTube channel. If not, there's a couple comics by the numbers. There's a few different channels that kind of do this. If so, definitely want to send some love that channel's way. Always appreciate people who are trying to make sense of the numbers and kind of where everything sits. It's worthwhile to try and unravel some of this, especially since the numbers are pretty opaque right now. We don't have a lot of good transparency into what's going on. So I appreciate people who are trying to make sense of things, asking the right questions. That's the right thing to do. So let's get to this question here, and it opens up something I don't talk about much, and I don't hear talked about really anywhere. And it's the omnibus. But let me read the question, and we'll talk about what does the omnibus have to do with sales. So it says, hey, Perch, I did some amateur number crunching of the 2021 limited Comic-Con data and noticed some interesting trends. Number one, Marvel sales are dominated by 70 omnibuses with a median price of $125 a piece. Marvel's dominance of DC is due to the wide array of IP to draw on, Star Wars, Conan, Alien, etc., whereas Warner keeps their other media in licensing with third parties. Number three, Image Boom and smaller publishers are dependent on a small number of hits to stay viable. This is venture style. We'll talk about what that means in a minute here. 25 writers are on 17 million in creator-owned graphic novel sales. Now you might say 25 writers, that's pretty good. Remember some of these other stats coming out, like there's 200 comic books coming out next week. next week. And you quickly kind of come to realize that that's a pretty small number given the volume. It is very much venture style. The explosion in omnibus sales does not seem stable from a macroeconomic standpoint. Most customers are not able to buy this volume of omnibuses before, and those that can now are likely able to because of the pandemic. Not entirely sure that's why, but we'll get more to it in a second. The sales of normal graphic novels are much softer than in prior years. This is an interesting observation. It's true. By the way, when I first read this, I'm like, I need to do at least some minimal fact checking to, see if it backs up. But yeah, absolutely, that is accurate. My concern is not that Marvel will go bankrupt like in the 90s, as much as have an implosion like DC did in the 70s. It will create a large number of customers to tune out of comics when there is still little to bring in new readers to shops. All right, so there are quite a few things all in that one mail. So let's attack them one by one. First, omnibuses. So it's absolutely a fact that there are a greater number of omnibuses being printed and churned out, and the sales for those omnibuses have risen. You can look on Amazon, you can look on a couple other places, and you see that the purchase of the omnibus has become something that's really taken off and exploded over the last 2 years. Is that because of the pandemic? Possibly. I think it's really a result of just kind of social media and promotion of omnibuses and people becoming aware that these things existed. In many cases, you had collectors and people who these are the diehards. These are the people who have been collecting comics for 20, 30 years. They've been getting trades, and now they're kind of buying up into omnibus. And it makes sense because several of these people have aged older. They've gotten jobs, or they've gotten raises. They have more financial stability. And so, their love of comics is like, well, now I have to mature. I can no longer drink wine coolers. I'm moving my way up to whiskey. The same kind of thing with comics. It's like, well, now I'm going to replace some of those old paperback trades with the hardcover omnibus, put it on the shelf, become a fancy lad of comics. And I think that's what you're seeing. Yes, I think it's unsustainable. Not so much because the pandemic is coming to an end, but because people are pretty much buying what they wanted. They're coming to a conclusion of their comic buying journey, and they're in terms of omnibuses, and they're just not going to keep getting omnibuses. And I think the other small factor here is that the big companies have been pretty haphazard to terrible in terms of what they put into print, how they get the omnibus out. It's a very non-strategy from the big two when it comes to those books. The omnibuses are not something typically that the indies can do. Of course, there are some, but not many. And by not having any kind of coherent market strategy for them, it means that this is short-term revenue. It means that eventually people are going to buy the omnibus they want, they're going to be done, and then those sales are going to drop. Now, why is that a bad thing? Well, because of what this person mentioned. At $125 a pop, it's become a key part of the business model for these companies, and you're seeing a lot of people buy in. You are absolutely seeing weaker graphic novel trades. This is not something that Heidi McDonald or the other news sites will comment on when they talk about comic sales being through the roof, driven by graphic novels. They're lumping everything into graphic novels, including these omnibuses. And if you just think about it, just again, do the math. If you think about a trade paperback that was once $14.99, and now they're able to sell $125 omnibus, but they're both lumped into the same category. Hell yes, it looks like trade paperbacks are going through the roof. There's a lot more money in there, but the volumes are not the same. And it's also unsustainable. People are not going to drop $125 a month for the rest of their lives. That's not going to happen, not at this level. So this is an interesting trend to kind of watch out for. Typically, you'd hope that the trade market would be going up as well, and that's what we keep hearing. Oh, the trades are doing great. Everything's going to trades. No, not really. Everything's going to omnibuses. That's a real story, and that should be concerning to people. Anyway, in terms of the second point, Marvel's dominance over DC due to having just more things to deal with. Yeah, I mean, Star Wars, for all the complaints it gets, and Kathleen Kennedy is killing the fandom and everything else, Star Wars has created a little segment of comic buying that is separate from the other things Marvel's doing, and it's been something else they've been able to play with. Conan and Alien, not as much, certainly not at that level, but it is an area where Marvel has kind of more eggs in the basket, they've got more bets on the table, whatever analogy you'd like to use, and that does help them. But it's this last one to really then put some more focus on. The indies are being propped up by a small number of hits, and it really is a small number of hits. Now, if you think about a venture capitalist firm or any kind of holdings company that has a number of different properties, what that model is for software, for tech, is that they might invest in, I don't know, 20, 30 companies. They're not expecting 20, 30 companies to do well. They're expecting 2, maybe 5 to pop. If they all do great, that's wonderful. That does not happen. But typically, the holdings are comprised of a number of things. Some are defensive. You're defending IP or patents or other things. You don't really expect them to take off, but you expect them to kind of, maybe ward off other things, other bets. In some cases, they try and get companies in their portfolio that are somewhat similar, so that if they need to, they can kind of mix them together, and that will create an even bigger opportunity. That's what's going on there in a lot of cases. And in comics, you have the same thing. The problem is the money isn't, unlike venture companies where, at the end of the day, these companies can pop big and sell for 150, 300, 500 million dollars. These are properties where they're doing well enough to keep the small company afloat, but they're not doing well enough to actually, create. I mean, it's not going to make companies. And the ones that are doing historically the best, a lot of the rights, a lot of the power sits, with the property holder, with the creator. So the actual company itself is not getting that much benefit out of it. They're getting some. But put it this way, if Mark Millar decides I'm done with Image and he decides to take his stuff away, he takes a good chunk of their cash away, like a pretty healthy chunk. And he could do that relatively quickly. I mean, he can do it within, the year if he wanted to. Now, where would he go? I mean, who knows? Dark Horse or somewhere else. I'm not sure where he'd actually, wind up. But the fact that, you can pretty much, with a lot of these cases, move around or change or quit or end the comic, and that revenue just cuts off. If James Tinian's got a big hit at Boom and he decides I'm going to wrap this up. Substack is offering me more money to kind of just stay there. I'll just do that. Well, he could just leave, and he could leave tomorrow, and not a big deal. And if that happened, that would be pretty catastrophic in a lot of ways to Boom. I mean, if 3 to 4 creators leave Boom, they're screwed. So anyway, thank you very much for the mail. It's good stuff. What do you make of all this? The omnibus angle is a really good one. And I agree. I don't think it's that it's unsustainable, going to crash, but it's definitely setting up a pretty bad scenario. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, as always. And thanks for listening.